Good morning, Christ Central, and welcome to our daily devotional this very chilly Friday morning. Today we're continuing in Luke, and I am reading Jesus feeds the 5,000. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here." He replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, We only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. Unless we go and buy food for the crowd." About 5,000 men were there. But he said to the disciples, "Make them sit down in groups of about 50 each." The disciples did so, and everybody sat down. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to set before the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. So this is the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus takes his disciples to a town called Bethsaida, and they witness him performing miracles of healing. They're followed by, we are told, a crowd who start to get hungry. The disciples obviously turn to Jesus and say, "Let the crowds go to the surrounding villages so they can find some food." But Jesus turns it back onto the disciples and says, "Well, no, you feed them." The disciples begin to panic because they only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes, hardly enough to feed the 5,000 plus crowd. Now, Jesus could easily have sent the crowds home early for their tea, and he could also have provided a lavish banquet, if he'd so chosen to do so, but he doesn't. So this miracle clearly is for the disciples and our benefit. Jesus asks the disciples to take the small amount that they have and start distributing it. The message here is clear. Our small amounts aren't enough to change the world, but God can do amazing things if we freely give. But do we really trust God with our finances? Did the disciples? Well, like us, initially, no. Despite the fact they had literally just witnessed Jesus in person performing healing miracles, they still number crunched and did the maths, which didn't stack up. Sound familiar? In terms of finances, it's not really what we can afford to give. Often it's what God puts on our hearts to give. And we have to look back at our financial miracles and trust in God to make the numbers add up. But the well-known story of the feeding of the 5,000 doesn't only apply to finances. What about the other small amounts we can give? What can God do with 5 minutes of our time, for example? Just think what a thoughtful text message could do. Perhaps when we're on a train or in a waiting room or in a lunch queue. Instead of checking our BBC News feed for the millionth time that day, we could just send a thinking of you text. We could learn that someone we know well is having a bit of a tough time. We only have 5 minutes at that point, but it might just be enough to arrange a coffee date or a phone chat or a beer down the pub at a later time. What about 5 minutes of our rest time? What could God do with that? Or any of you who have teenagers will know that it's no good asking, "How was your day?" in the car or at the dinner table. You'll get the same reply, "Fine." But just as you're about to watch your favourite TV drama or have a peaceful few minutes winding down with a book, that's when they suddenly want to talk. My first instinct is always to say, "Really?" But if I don't and I listen, I usually get to hear about an issue with work or school or an anxiety they might have. Teenagers don't talk for long, but in that 5 minutes, you can learn a lot by listening. And then you're able to return to this next day and show that you are there, should they want to talk. Then There's our Bible reading time. Now, gone are the days when we had the potential to forget our bulky gift Bibles when we leave the home. Oh no, we have Bible apps and daily readings on our phones. And who honestly forgets their phone? 5 minutes Bible reading during our busy schedules might just be possible. And that 5 minutes might just change the course of how we react to a situation and transform our day, and maybe that of those around us. We are living in turbulent times. A war we thought would never again ever would happen, has happened, and we're receiving huge numbers of refugees. Will this potentially create opportunities for us to give in small ways? The cost of living is scarily high and set to increase. We can't solve this, but by responding in small ways with the limited amount we have, could that make a difference? Maybe we could spare a box of cereal or a packet of biscuits for a food bank. Maybe this time next year, even our language classes might be running again, and we'll be doing crash courses in basic Ukrainian. This will obviously ripple effect out to refreshments, befrienders, etc., etc. Small, manageable amounts of time might be required in different ways and bring with it opportunities for us. This miracle we have heard this morning highlighted to the disciples that just because Jesus could have solved the whole issue himself, he decided not to. He decided to let the disciples do it by giving the small amounts they had and trusting in him. The message is the same for us today. God uses the small amounts we have given to further his kingdom and to help do his work. Thank you for listening.